Wednesday morning, it was Janice and Sarah together who picked me up. Jennifer saw and she scowled, but she said nothing. As I dropped my overnight bag on the back seat beside me, Janice winked at me through the mirror. I thought I'd drive so I can take that bag straight home. How are you, Brittany? I'm all right, Janice. You? He smirked and then cast a look at Sarah, who was fiddling with her makeup bag. I've never been so happy in my life. I never thought it would happen to me, but he shrugged his shoulders. I'm glad it did. When we arrived at school, Sarah turned around in her seat. Come on, I'll work my magic on that Hickey again. That way you don't have to wear that shirt. Must be really hot. I nodded in relief, but just as I was about to pull down the collar of the turtleneck shirt I was wearing, Jennifer sauntered into sight. She was fast approaching the car. What was she up to? Sarah saw my look and nodded. I'll do it during lunch in the bathroom. Come on, Brittany. Then the girl climbed out of the car after kissing Janice. Jennifer watched us walk into school, a curious look on her face that told me she wasn't going to let this be. Obviously, she thought I was up to something and she was determined to find out what. And if she couldn't find out, she'd just make sure I was in so much trouble I couldn't do it anyway. During first period, Mr. Cooks, our grizzled teacher, kept casting me curious looks. It was almost as if he could see the Hickey on my neck straight through the fabric of my shirt. Already I felt extremely warm and uncomfortable. Sarah cast me a mischievous look when she said goodbye to me in the hall, but no nasty surprises awaited me during second period. Bob didn't talk much, as was usual, but he cast me a warm look. Jennifer, on the other hand, stirred her minions up into a frenzy so that they all started taunting me with the too warm shirt. It was annoying more than anything, but still, I was rather frustrated by the end of the period. I stalked all the way to third, where I planned on giving Alexander a piece of my mind. Of course, when I got there, I realized I couldn't very well do that with the entire classroom present. I sat down in the back next to Sarah, glowering at him and glaring every time he turned to smirk at me. The exchange didn't go unnoticed to the rest of the class, especially not to Jennifer. It wasn't fair that for a stereotyped slutty blonde bitch, she was pretty smart. Alexander didn't come near me at all, and despite my anger, I noted that the physical tension was building again. How unfair. I wanted to be furious with him for forcing me to wear the stupid turtleneck. Yet most of the time, all I could think about was kissing him like yesterday, feeling his body pressed against mine. When class was over, Sarah helped me out by asking me some questions about the homework and insisted on discussing a project she had for art with me. By the time she was done talking, the entire classroom had emptied. Only Jennifer stood right in front of Alexander, pressing herself up against him. It was hilarious to see how he was backing away, till he hit the chalkboard, his eyes frantically trying to meet mine, begging me to get my creepy stepsister away from him. Jennifer knew she wasn't having the desired effect on him yet. She kept cooing at him, making flirty comments. For some reason, Alexander was scrunching up his nose, as if he smelled something he didn't like. I smirked at Sarah, who nodded, and we both made our way over to them. Alexander cast me a relieved look, obviously thinking I was going to free him from Jennifer. Instead, I met Jennifer's eyes and smiled at her. Good day. Bye, Mr. Clitton. Then I waltzed out the door with a laughing Sarah hot on my heels. Alexander's mortified look was something I wouldn't forget, ever. As we reached the cafeteria, Sarah wondered, "You're not scared? He's going to fall for your stepsister's charm after all." I plopped down ungracefully in a chair next to Bob and shook my head, still laughing. No way. Did you see his face? I resolved into a fit of giggles that was amplified by Bob looking at me curiously. Sarah nodded with a smile. Just checking. I know Alex would never fall for a girl like your sis anyway. He deserved to be left in her clutches after what he did yesterday. Revenge was very sweet. Kate! Although my skin did feel unnaturally tight, I felt tired and a little drained. I was guessing it had something to do with not getting my dose of Alexander. Oh well, it was worth it to see him look so horrified when we left him with Jennifer. I finished my lunch in 10 minutes and was just about to get up with Sarah to go to the bathroom to finally fix that Hickey. But a shadow fell over the table from behind me, and without looking, I knew it was Alexander. What do you want? I asked without looking up. My skin was tingling with all the tension again, and I had to fight down the urge to jump up and smother him in kisses. I want you in my classroom right now. He growled the words. Oh, he was really pissed off, wasn't he? I shrugged, still not looking up. For what reason, Mr. Clitton? Did I do something wrong? I smirked in Sarah's direction, enjoying myself just a little too much. Do you want attention again today, Brittany? Alexander said, not growling now, but still sounding very pissed off. Fine, I'm coming, I told him, at long last looking behind me to meet his eyes. Only then did I realize that his white dress shirt was soaked, showing off his muscular chest as it clung to his skin tightly. How the hell did that happen? Then I narrowed my eyes at the group of girls to our right that was openly ogling him as if he was eye candy. I got up out of my seat and followed Alexander hurriedly as he stalked out of the cafeteria. He obviously wasn't in the mood to wait for me. He took me through the empty hallways to his English classroom. I wondered how many classes he taught. Biology. He held open the door for me so I could enter first, and then he slammed it shut behind him, locking the door with an ominous click. I swallowed, but I wasn't worried he'd hurt me. I knew he'd never intentionally do that. Of course, Alexander looked a vision with his white shirt wet, the top few buttons undone. Some of his dark hair had gotten wet too, and it clung to his forehead. My eyes just had to follow the drop of water that ran down his face across his throat to disappear into the V of his shirt down his chest. Alexander's stormy gray eyes were nearly black again as he frowned at my face. "Why didn't you help me?" "She damn near tried to rape me, Britt. I had to throw water on her to get her away from me." He stalked over to me and I backed up into his desk, my skin shivering and my hands itching to follow the path of that single drop of water across his skin. The fierce, commanding presence, the glare, it made me aware of how masculine he was. He was used to getting his way, to being obeyed. His every move proved that. He trapped me between him and the desk, one hand on either side of me, but he didn't touch me. I smiled at him. "You deserved it, Alexander." I met his angry eyes with my own without hesitation, showing him that for all his bluster, he didn't intimidate me. "Deserved it," he growled. I laughed, feeling confident and happy at having managed to upset him as much as he had me. Yes, I yanked the collar of my shirt sideways to show him the hickey. "Because of you, I have to wear this stupid, way too warm shirt." With my other hand, I poked his chest, ignoring the sparks that ignited at the touch. His black eyes followed the curve of my neck to rest on the red mark on my skin there, and then he grinned, that male satisfaction appearing on his face again. "I told you not to cover it up a gramo short." He didn't look all that angry anymore though. He didn't even look remorseful. I remembered how he'd somehow known about the lullaby last night. With that eerily accurate text message, angry. I poked him in the chest again. "I have to cover it up, you jerk. My stepmother and sister would kill me if they saw it. Oh, and remember, the deal is off." He quirked an eyebrow at me, amused now for some reason. "So you said a run." I did not read your mind though. I growled and ignored the absurdity of the whole situation. "Then how the hell did you know to text me about the lullaby?" Mind reading was impossible. Instead of replying, Alexander leaned into me, his breath filtering across my lips. "I think we're even. You have a hickey, I've got a wet shirt, and we'll have a whole classroom of drooling girls here in a short while." That thought made a hot spark of jealousy stab through me. I did not want all those teenage girls staring at his chest. "I did not read your mind, Agramo Croy," he whispered, "and I think you're really sexy when you're mad." After that, he pressed his lips to mine, kissing me fiercely and possessively. I moaned as my body responded, burning warmth spreading through me and pooling low in my body. I automatically spread my legs so he could step in between them. He lifted me effortlessly off the floor and set me down on the edge of his desk. He didn't stop at that, pushing me down further so I was on my back, his body hovering above mine. I was wrapping my legs around his hips, moaning at the contact of his erection as I pulled him closer to me. He broke the kiss to groan, his nearly black eyes roaming down my body as he skimmed a hand across the curve of my breasts. I arched my back as the touch rubbed against my nipple, the skin suddenly painfully tight there. Then he pulled aside the collar of my shirt, tracing his tongue over the hickey. "It's not a real mark, agramo schwa," he whispered hotly. "A real mark wouldn't fade away, but this will do for now." My thoughts were too incoherent to understand what he was saying. My body was on such a high that it felt like I could burst at any moment. Those hands of his rubbing my breasts and his lower body straining against mine through the fabric of our clothes. Suddenly, he pulled away, and I whined at the loss of body contact. It made him chuckle as I glared at him from under drooping eyelashes. It wasn't fair that he had such a strong effect on me. It seemed one touch would send me down an endless spiral downwards where all I could do was crave for more. As I sat up and pulled my shirt straight, he smirked at me with satisfaction. "You are mine, Brittany." I shivered at the stark possessiveness in his voice, but despite the urge to tell him he didn't own me, a big part of me felt strongly appreciative of the power reflected in him. He was so very male and dominant and powerful. When I felt I had fixed myself enough to look presentable, I stood up. My legs were still wobbly, but I ignored that and closed the distance between us again. I kept my eyes firmly on his face and willed myself to look stern. I told you the deal was off, Alexander. He glared at him. So you did a gramokroi, but I did not break it. He was deadly serious as he replied, his eyes on my lips as I spoke. You're not allowed to just kiss me like that anymore. Then I spun around and stalked towards the door, planning to leave and not think about him for the rest of the day until I had to see him again at our date. Alexander had something else in mind though, because he stopped me at the door, an amused smile on his lips. All right, I will ask your permission to kiss you first next time. Now before you leave, let me fix your hair. Ask my permission to kiss? God, he was impossible. I shivered as he ran gentle fingers through my auburn curls, straightening my hair carefully so that no one could tell I'd just been heavily making out with him. There, I will see you tonight. Agramo quoi. Don't let Sarah bully you into wearing something uncomfortable. I heard a click as he unlocked the door and felt him brush his lips softly against my temple. He stepped away from me, running his hands through his own hair and then started rebuttoning his shirt. Shocked, I realized I had been responsible for undoing it. Go, Britt. You don't want to be late for your next class, he said, amused at my stare. I nodded. See you later, Alexander. Then I walked out the door into the luckily still empty hall. As the door fell shut behind me, I felt a soft touch on my mind, and then the image of Alexander and I on his desk, both of us naked as he drove my body to pleasure. That was not my thought. Asshole was seriously messing with my mind. I could hear Alexander laughing through the door. And damn it, now Sarah still hadn't covered up the hickey, so I had to walk around in that way to hot turtleneck even longer. I had only just enough time to pick up my books and bag, and then I had to go back to class. Sarah was by my side though, with another knowing smile, although she was occasionally distracted by texting Dennis. Thanks to Alexander, I spent the rest of the day thinking of him and what we were going to do on our date. I was nervous about that now. What was he going to expect of me? Did he want sex? It certainly seemed that way, and despite our serious kissing, I wasn't sure I was ready for that so soon. Hey, baby, a low voice suddenly said, right next to me. Shocked, I stepped back, away from Fort. Why did I keep walking into him? He was so bloody sneaky. Leave me alone, Fort. I'm not in the mood for your crap, I snapped at him. Sidestepping so I could walk around him, I continued on my way with Sarah still by my side. She was shooting him angry glares, but Fort didn't seem impressed by that. Not in the mood? That sounds promising, the guy said with a smirk. He grabbed my wrist and spun me around. Fort, let her go. Sarah yelled angrily while I stared up at his face, imagining a dark wolf prowling behind those eyes of his. Oh, shut up, freak. You and your witchy boyfriend don't scare me. Fort snapped at Sarah, pushing her away from us roughly. Sarah was slammed sideways into a row of lockers with a loud bang. Surely the teachers had heard that and would come running now. But as I looked around, all I saw was students gathering around to watch. Not a single adult around. Fort turned his attention back on me. I know you want to be with me, baby. There's no need to play hard to get. I find it a rather tiring game. He hadn't let go of my wrist and pulled me into him so hard that I stumbled. You wouldn't talk this way if your dad was in town. Fort. He's going to punish you when he's back. My brother has already spoken to him, Sarah said, her voice controlled. It reminded me of Alexander when he was really mad. Fort laughed loudly, throwing his head back as if he found it really funny. There were several other guys in the crowd around us that laughed along. It was rather creepy. Sarah dear, my father's ancient history. I'm in control now. At those words, he wrapped an arm tightly around my waist. I could feel the hard planes of his body and, to my disgust, his arousal as well. I tried elbowing him hard since I wasn't in the position to knee him in the crotch, but it hurt me more than him. Damn, he was hard. Suddenly, Sarah was by my side, yanking the collar of my turtleneck down to reveal the hickey for everyone to see. She's taken Fort. You know my brother Alexander. If he finds out you touched her, he'll kill you, Sarah hissed. It was hard to understand what she was saying, and I only understood because she was right next to my ear. Still, Fort quickly let go of me and then stepped back, his eyes tight and filled with hatred. In the crowd, those same guys that had laughed now all wore frowns as if they too had heard what Sarah had said. No one else seemed to notice, though. They were all busy speculating about who had given me the hickey. A lot of them actually thought it had been Sarah. One voice stood out, though. I knew it. I knew you were hiding something. Jennifer? Of course she had to see this. See? Come, Brittany, let's go. A soft tug on my hand was enough to get my feet moving. I followed Sarah through the halls to our next class. At the back of the crowd, I spotted Mr. Cooks, our grizzled math teacher. Why didn't he step in if he'd been here all along? "I'm sorry, Sarah, but with Thomas still away, my hands are bound," the fearsome-looking man said to my friend. Sarah just nodded as if she understood his reasons. That left me more questions than answers. Clearly, Fort had some sort of control over the teachers, or maybe just Mr. Cooks. Control that usually lay with Fort's father. But since he was gone at the moment, it had passed on to him. I couldn't think of anything that would make sense, though. Nor the fact that those guys in the crowd had definitely heard what Sarah had said, even though she'd been so quiet that I had trouble hearing it, and I had been right next to her. Did they all have super hearing? Sarah didn't want to explain anything when I asked, though, and I couldn't very well ask her what was on my mind anyway during class. So soon enough, last period rolled around, and I happily hurried to the biology classroom. Maybe I could pry some answers from Alexander after class was done. When I got to the class, however, Alexander wasn't there. Instead, Mr. Clitton stood there. Where did Alexander go? Was he sick? Confused, I sat down in the back as usual, all by myself. "I'm replacing Mr. Clitton for today, class, because he had to take his younger brother, Bob Clitton, to the hospital," Mr. Clitton explained briefly. After that, he cut right to the chase and started explaining things about the subject we were working on in his boring, monotone voice. I hoped Bob was all right. It must have been an emergency or something. Class went agonizingly slow without Alexander, and it was that way for everyone. I constantly heard people sigh, and no one seemed to be looking at the chalkboard. Instead, we were all sort of doodling or staring out the window. I was the first out the door when the final bell rang. That was a first for everyone there, obviously, and I heard them whisper amongst each other as I left them behind. Sarah said to meet her outside at the car. Dennis would be waiting for us. He was, leaned against the hood of the car, playing with his phone. As I reached him, he opened his arms for a hug, and I gladly complied. There you all go, Chapter 10. It takes a while because I have to edit things. The next chapters are all written already, but I'm really unhappy with some of the background details in it, so I'm redoing that. Please vote and comment. It definitely helps to motivate me to write faster and update faster. Rough day, Brittany? He asked with a smile. I nodded. Yeah, run in with Fort. He called you a witch and then tossed Sarah into a row of lockers. Dennis froze and stared at me. He called me a witch? I shrugged. Yeah, I don't see why though. You look nothing like a witch. He laughed. Thanks. Is Sarah okay? But just at that moment, she appeared, bouncing up to us and jumping in his arms to smother him with kisses. Yeah, she's fine, I told him, although I doubted he was listening. Instead, I got in the car. I had just spotted Jennifer and Fort coming out of the school. Fort wasn't looking at us, but Jennifer was, and she had that evil look on her face that told me trouble was going to find me soon. Are you sure, Sarah? I asked hesitantly as I stared at my reflection in the mirror. I was wearing a skin-tight dark red dress. It was the color of blood. The dress wrapped around my torso elegantly and accentuated my breasts with a narrow split down the front to reveal the inner slopes. The dress left my back bare but flared out around the hips. If I twirled around, the skirt would form a perfect circle around me. It reached till just past my knees with layers to show darker red and black underneath. Of course, Sarah had also managed to get me into heels. I couldn't help it. They were just so pretty that I had to try them on. Once on, Sarah hadn't let me take them off again. They were red too, darker than the dress, and ribbons tied them to my feet that wrapped around my legs in elegant crosses all the way to my knees. They were so dainty and small that they made my already small feet look tiny. Alexander said to wear something comfortable. I told my friend for the umpteenth time, but I knew she wouldn't listen. To be honest, I thought I looked pretty in the mirror, and the heels and dress might not have been all that comfortable. At least they made me feel really sexy and feminine. I liked how the low but very narrow plunging neckline accentuated my mother's angel wing necklace too. Sarah sat me down on a chair and started on my hair and makeup, twirling strands into curls and pinning them on my head in a fancy pattern. It looked really pretty and made me think of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. You look stunning already, Brittany, and I'm not even done yet, exclaimed Sarah as I expressed my doubts again. I was really nervous about tonight. Would Alexander like the dress? Or would he think I was too young after all? She did my makeup very lightly, just some eyeliner and eyeshadow to accentuate the color of my eyes. She said I didn't need anything else, and when I asked her about the Hickey, she'd laughed. Honey, you'll be with Alexander. He'll want to be able to see it. No need to hide it now. There, you're all done. Let's see if the boys downstairs approve. She made me wait in her bedroom while she called Dennis and Bob to come upstairs. Bob was fine. Apparently the hospital thing had been excused so he and Alexander could leave school earlier. Why they had to leave early, Bob wouldn't explain. When Dennis came in, he whistled loudly. "You clean up real nice, Brittany. Nice work, baby." Then he just totally turned around to hug Sarah and kiss her. Bob shook his head at the antics and then smiled at me. "He's right though, you look amazing. Alexander is going to have a hard time keeping himself from eating you alive." I stared at Bob and felt just a tiny bit scared by that comment. Who complimented someone by saying they might get eaten alive? That's just plain weird. Go on downstairs then. Brittany, Alexander is waiting at the bottom. I looked at the 3 people in the room and then breathed in deeply. All right, time to face Alexander. As I slowly descended the grand flight of stairs, I felt a bit like I was in a movie. Alexander was waiting for me at the bottom, and he wore a handsomely tailored suit, black with a dark red tie. I had the feeling that was Sarah's doing. He looked breathtaking, and his stormy gray eyes stared up at me filled with unadulterated desire. That sent hot shivers down my spine, and I nearly stumbled on the last step, his arms catching me before I could fall. He smirked at me. "Falling for me already, Britt?" Blushing, I shook my head. "I'm just not used to heels. I told you to wear something comfortable, gramo kroi." His voice was suave as he slid an arm around my waist and started guiding me out of the house. My heels clicked on the marble floor and then on the cobblestones outside. "You know what Sarah is like? I bet she bullied you into wearing that tie so that we would match," I told Alexander with a smile. We'd reached his car and like a gentleman, he opened the door for me before running to the other side and getting in himself. "Oh yes, she did. She knows red is one of my favorite colors. You look very edible in red," he said when he got inside and started the engine. Seems like Bob's comment wasn't that weird after all. If Alexander thought I looked edible, "You have Indian blood in you, haven't you?" he asked me suddenly. I nodded, surprised that he had noticed. "Yes, my mother was Cherokee. I thought you just had a nice tan from the summer," Alexander explained with a look at the narrow neckline and the cleavage showing. "Or that's not a tan, it's your natural skin color." Blushing. I nodded. It was the one thing Jennifer had never called ugly. I had the distinct feeling, in fact, that she'd always been jealous of my skin. "Where are we going, Alexander?" I asked him, scanning our surroundings. Not that I recognized where we were going. After all, I still didn't know the town all that well. We just turned into a small road, out of town and into the forest that lay around it. "It's a surprise at Gramokoi," he said with a smirk that told me he was really enjoying this. His accent had gone back to sounding Irish, and I felt happy about that. It was a sign he felt comfortable around me, wasn't it? After a few more minutes, the road had wound. It's way up, and then lights came into sight. Alexander helped me get out of the car and lead me down a small path to the opening of a small meadow. The meadow was covered with lanterns hanging from every branch, lighting up the place like a fairy tale. In the middle lay a large plaid spread out and weighted down on the corners so the wind, however slight, couldn't take hold of it. Just beyond the blanket was a small spring with crystal clear water. It was very shallow, and candles had been placed around it on every flat rock visible. There were floating candles in the water too. I could only stare in wonder. Had he really gone through all the trouble of making the meadow look like this? "Do you like it, Agramokroy?" Alexander whispered in my ear. "It's so beautiful," I told him softly, my voice catching in my throat. I almost wanted to cry because I felt so special. A soft push in my back made me realize he wanted me to go to the blanket and sit down. I blushed and walked over to it, happy to sink down on the softness and hide my legs underneath the wide skirt of the dress. It was colder outside than I expected. Alexander had been carrying a large picnic basket with him, and I felt silly for not having noticed it before. He sat down beside me and started unpacking it, revealing plates and glasses and a bottle of sparkling champagne. Then he took out steaming, warm pastries and other delicious-smelling food. He smiled at my wide eyes as he piled food on a single plate. Who knew Dennis was so good at cooking? Then he handed me the plate and stretched his legs out behind me, so that part of my side was leaning against them. It felt nice and warm, and immediately I didn't feel cold anymore. As I took a bite of the food, I couldn't help but sigh at the explosion of taste on my tongue. This was absolutely divine. I took a small bit between my fingers and reached over to him. "You have to try this. It's heavenly." His eyes followed my hand, and then he obediently leaned forward to allow me to put the food in his mouth. I shivered as his lips brushed my fingers. He chewed slowly and then swallowed. "He should go professional with food like that," he murmured. His eyes were still on me as I tried more of the food, watching my expression avidly as if it was the most interesting thing in the world. "Aren't you gonna eat?" I asked after a while, feeling uncomfortable with him watching me eat. He shrugged. "I don't eat much at Gromokoi. Would you like some wine?" He started pouring the clear champagne into 2 wine glasses and handed me one without waiting for a reply. "Surely you must eat something, Alexander?" I frowned at him as I put my plate away and accepted the glass he handed me. "Don't worry about me, Britt. I will explain something to you in a short moment. Let me enjoy watching you for just a little longer," Alexander said, his voice soft and amused, a twinkling in his gray eyes as he looked at my face as if trying to memorize every little detail. Blushing, I looked away and took a few sips from the champagne. Why was he looking at me like that? Was he afraid I would disappear? Or run away? His fingertips tilted my chin up so I would meet his eyes. "I just want to remember you as you are now." I stared at him and suddenly worried that he was going to be the one to run away. He changed his mind. He didn't want to lose his job after all. "I want to remember you as you are before I tell you my secret, a gramo kroi." Secret? Was he going to explain me about the mind reading thing? I already guessed that much, hadn't I? And I hadn't run away screaming or declared him a lunatic. Since I had finished eating, Alexander repacked all the food items back into the basket and pulled out a plate of strawberries. I had told him those were my favorite fruit. If it was up to me, I'd eat them every day. "Dessert," he smiled, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes this time. He seemed nervous somehow. Was whatever secret he wanted to tell me really that big that he was afraid to tell me? I popped a strawberry in my mouth and stared at him curiously. "You know you can tell me anything, Alexander. I know, Britt, but this is... well, you'll understand once I've told you, I hope." He shifted closer to me and ran his fingers over the hickey on my neck. It wasn't on purpose. A run, I lost control. I shrugged, even as I shivered at his touch. I'm not mad about it anymore. For some reason, it scared off Fort. "Good," he nodded. Then hesitating, as if he thought of how to phrase something, he said, "Do you really believe I can read your mind?" Oh, so it was about the mind reading after all. Either you're really good at reading facial expressions or you can read minds. Although, I thought about how to explain the text message from the night before. "Yes?" he prompted. "That message you sent me last night? About the lullaby and the Hickey and Hay and I always being welcome? Why did you send that? How did you know I had just sung that lullaby? That's not even mind reading, that has to be, I don't know, telepathic. Or were you secretly standing outside my bedroom window or something?" Alexander nodded. "Telepathic is the word I'd use. I was at home. Bob and Dennis can testify to that. But we have this connection. Britt, I don't even mean to listen in, but, well, as with the lullaby, I just heard." I shivered as he confirmed that I wasn't imagining those things, at least. I felt almost relieved about that. "Do you have that with a lot of people?" I wondered. He shook his head. "No, just you a gramo twai. Sarah is the telepathic one, not me. Or at least, I'm not very strongly telepathic. Sarah is telepathic? Oh, no wonder she always looks like she knows everything," it exclaimed. I was a little worried that I wasn't freaking out about this yet, but I supposed it was because I already knew this, sort of. "Alexander, have you... when you, read my mind, can you put feelings or thoughts in it too?" I asked, as I thought about all the times I felt a soft caress on my mind, filling me with warm feelings. I remembered the image of us on the desk too. It made me blush again. Alexander shrugged. "Yes, I suppose, but you would recognize them as foreign. I can't make you think something." Relieved, I nodded. "So it was you that filled my head with nice things every night before I fell asleep? And countless other moments like that?" A smile tugged at his lips as he nodded. "Very good. I hadn't realized you had noticed all that." He seemed a little proud of that fact even. I swear though, a gramo kroi, that I haven't intentionally read your mind again after we made that deal. Anything I'd picked up since then was because you were sending so strongly. He opened his arms and I gladly crawled into them, rejoicing in his warmth. "Sending strongly?" "Yes. For example, last night you angled a thought directly at me. You're going to pay for that Hickey, Mr. Clitton." "Oh, and the deal is off." I could hear the smile in his voice as he said it. That was very funny, a run. I fell out of bed laughing. I shivered as he quoted the exact sentence I had thought last night, sending it to him because I felt like he'd spied on me with the lullaby. "You really fell out of bed, Alexander?" I frowned. I thought I'd imagined that happening. "And did Bob barge in to check if you were all right?" Alexander chuckled, and that sent a pleasant vibration through my body. "Yes, a gramo quoi. That is exactly what happened." "You planted that image in my head then, because I remember it," I told him. I felt him shake, although I couldn't see his face seated like this. "No, Britt, that was all your own doing." I twisted around so I could see his face. "Are you saying I'm telepathic too or something?" He was frowning and tugged me into his lap. It made my heartbeat race. No, I don't think you are. We are just very connected. Why? Why, what a gram kwai. He focused his stormy gray eyes on mine. Why do you think we're connected? I asked, even as my heart screamed at me that it was true. That connection, even now, told me that Alexander wasn't as nervous as before. My easy acceptance of the whole telepathy thing, it had eased his mind. Do you believe in love at first sight, Brittany? He asked instead of answering my question. I breathed in sharply. Was it a coincidence that he echoed Sarah now, or at least my very own thoughts when Sarah told me about her feelings for Dennis? I knew that when she explained her feelings, I had thought that before Alexander, I wouldn't have believed it. I felt my cheeks heating up as I blushed, but I nodded at him. Yes, I believe in it. The muscles in his arms were tense as he wrapped them around me. So do I. I also believe in soulmates. Have you heard of that principle? Twisting further in his lap, I made sure I was facing him by wrapping my arms around his neck, my fingers automatically entangling in his silky hair. I have heard of it. For a moment, Alexander closed his beautiful eyes, breathing in deeply as if he enjoyed the feel of my hands in his hair. My heart was beating wildly in my chest now, nervous about what he was going to say next. Brittany? He trailed off, and for the first time ever, I realized that he was unsure of himself, as if he was afraid that his next words would scare me off. You think we are soulmates? I asked him, wanting desperately to ease his mind. I couldn't stand to see him, unsure. It wasn't right. He gasped at my bold words, his eyes flying open to meet mine. Yes, I believe that. Smiling at him, I leaned in and softly brushed my lips across his in a feather-light kiss. So do I, because the word soulmate rang like a chime in my mind. I could only too well remember what it had felt like when I first laid eyes on him. Love at first sight definitely fit that description, but it was more, much more than that. Because I felt whole around him, complete, and despite our differences, I also felt safe and accepted, and he always made me feel at ease. So at ease that I found myself telling him things I usually didn't share. The need to share with him was very strong too, and the need to actually be with him even stronger. That elastic band feeling, it felt like being away from him literally put a strain on my body, and it was so hard to be around him when I couldn't actually touch him. Not to mention that mental connection we obviously shared, Alexander kissed me again, fiercer than my kiss had been, but gentle nonetheless. It wasn't like any of the kisses we'd shared before, except maybe the first one. You believe me? You don't think I'm a creep? A freak? He asked a little breathlessly, pushing me down on my back on the blanket, hovering over me, leaning his weight on his arms on either side of me. Alexander? Of course not. I wouldn't think you're a creep. I feel the same. I pulled his face down to mine for another kiss. Good, he said as we came up for air, because I love you and I'm not letting you go. His arrogance restored now, obviously. Despite the fact that I knew what the whole soulmate principle implied, I still shivered in delight at hearing him say that he loved me. It made me glow on the inside and wishing to share that feeling with him. I reached out, not with my body, but with my mind. I love you too, Alexander, he moaned. So maybe you are telepathic a gramo shui. You're too good at it already. I felt him touch my mind with his and he reflected what he felt back, just like I had done. The fierce drive to protect me was shocking and made my heart swell, followed by so much tenderness and love. He was glowing too from the inside out. Desire had flared up in him now and he attached his lips to mine again, kissing me so passio-Alexly that my toes curled in my shoes. He held himself in check though this time, his gray eyes boring into mine as we parted for air. His hands still on either side of me holding onto the blanket we were lying on. Britt, he started, but feeling confident I shushed him. Alexander, will you tell me what a gror mocroi means now? I asked him. He frowned at my interruption, but then said, gra mocroi means my heart's beloved. I call you that because it is what you are, I smiled. That is really sweet. The thought that he'd basically been saying he loved me all this time was really amazing. Blushing, I kissed him again. Do I need to have an endearment to call you all the time too? He chuckled. No, I rather like it when you call me Alexander. No one these days uses my full name anymore. I pushed him over so he was on his back and straddled him. I had only been able to push him over because he had allowed me to. I knew that if he wanted to remain on top, he'd have no problem staying there. He raised a single eyebrow and looked up at me with an amused expression on his face, although I could feel that the action had aroused him. I was sitting right on top of the evidence. My skirt flared out around my hips so that it draped over his chest and down his legs. Was there something else you wanted to tell me? I asked him, remembering how I had interrupted him and that we had sort of gotten sidetracked on the whole soulmate thing. It wasn't what he originally wanted to tell me. He stared at me for a moment, his hands coming up to grab my hips, one of them sliding further upwards across my bare back before pulling me down, so that I was lying on his chest and he could wrap his arms around me, my head tucked into the crook of his neck. I think you've had enough information to process for one night, don't you? I heard rustling, and then a second blanket was pulled over the both of us, protecting me from the cold of the night. There's more? I asked him, my lips moving against the skin of his throat as I spoke. I couldn't help but smile in satisfaction at the goosebumps that appeared. Yes, I'm afraid there is, but it can wait, he said honestly, and I liked how his chest moved underneath me as he spoke. Can you at least explain to me why you claim you don't need to eat? I was starting to feel really sleepy now, but I didn't want to fall asleep just yet. It was quiet for a while, and then he said softly, I don't claim I don't need to eat. I just require a different kind of sustenance. Oh, like what? I asked curiously, moving my arms to slip them into his jacket. He was so nice and warm. I thought he wasn't going to reply because he was quiet for a long time. I even thought for a short moment that he'd fallen asleep, but as I gently touched my mind to his, I could feel he was still awake. It was so easy now to reach out with my mind and touch him. Almost second nature. Suddenly, he took a deep breath, lifting me a little in the air and slowly lowering me as he exhaled and his chest expanded. And blood. It's blood I need, he said then, his voice so soft and husky that I barely heard him. My mind already so foggy with sleep that I thought I misunderstood. Blood? Like a vampire? I asked him, even though the question sounded silly in my head, my soft whisper made it sound absolutely serious. Alexander didn't laugh as I said it, though. I had expected him to do that, but he didn't. He didn't say anything at all. Instead, he let me drift off to sleep. Just before I was gone, I heard him whisper, Yes, Brittany, exactly like a vampire. I woke up feeling rather hazy and warm. There was a scent in my nostrils that I wished I could wake up to every morning. It smelled like Alexander. Stretching. I turned around and curled up again, quickly drifting off for another hour or so, until at last the room had gotten too light for my senses to ignore it. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was that the bed was empty. I was alone. The second thing I noticed was that I was most definitely in Alexander's room, and I was wearing a shirt of his instead of PJs. The shirt was large enough to be a dress or nightgown, though. My eyes searched for a clock and finally landed on the analog, old-fashioned alarm on his nightstand. It read 10 a.m. Fuck. I sat up straight and scrambled out of bed. I was missing school! Shit, why didn't he wake me up? Where was he anyway? Don't tell me he went to school and left me here. Searching around the room, I couldn't find my own clothes anywhere, so I slipped on the way to a large pair of sweats that were his. They had been folded over a chair in the corner. I was about to open the door to search for my clothes or overnight bag when the memories of last night crashed into me. There was a lot of white noise as my mind scrambled around all the impossible things it wanted to forget. Soulmates. The words tumbled off my lips and I had to sit down again on the edge of the bed. Alexander believed we were soulmates, and I told him I believed so too. I realized I still believed that. I was already missing him terribly. Then there was this whole thing about telepathy, and a connection that Alexander and I apparently shared that allowed us to touch each other's minds and share thoughts. I wouldn't have believed that if I didn't remember clearly doing that and experiencing that myself these past few days. Just to prove it was true, I focused my thoughts on Alexander and called out in my head, Alexander, are you at school? Why didn't you wake me? I didn't feel or hear anything, and I was almost starting to think it hadn't worked and I was making a fool of myself. But then I felt it, a soft caress across my mind and Alexander's voice sounding amused. I tried a gramo croy. You were sleeping very deeply. Enjoy your day off. I called you in sick. Dennis is around the house somewhere if you want company. I had the vague sense of a classroom I was looking out over, and then that image was gone. Okay, that was pretty cool. I hadn't imagined that. If only he could have told me where my bag with clothes was. I was just about to leave the room again to find either my clothes or Dennis when I remembered the last words he'd said to me before I'd fallen asleep. Yes, Brittany, exactly like a vampire. With my hand on the doorknob, I stared at the dark wood. Had that been my sleep supplying those words? Or had Alexander really told me last night that he was in fact a vampire? I angled the thought at him immediately, and the answer was instant. His sending no more than a single word, yes. On wobbly legs, I turned back around and crawled into his bed. Maybe I should just go back to sleep. It seemed my mind wasn't functioning properly after all. When I woke up for the third time that day, it was because my stomach was growling angrily. The scent of fresh apple pie and cinnamon hung in the air, and without thinking, I scrambled out the door and down the stairs. Following my nose, I ended up in the kitchen, where indeed Dennis was cooking up all kinds of delicious things. His back was turned to me, but he started piling food on a plate for me even before I'd said hello. "There you go, Sleeping Beauty," he said as he handed me the food. "So, how are you feeling?" I dug in while I thought about that. We were placidity. I was worried because she had taken the whole "I'm a vampire" thing rather well. She felt so serene and calm that it seemed almost unnatural. The last time I told someone what I was, well, that person hadn't taken it so stoically, and I couldn't believe that Britt showed so little emotion over the whole thing. She must be in some sort of shock, and I wanted to be there to make sure she was all right when the truth sank in. Although, the mental link, she'd picked that up so fast. She'd even managed to contact me twice already today, and once 2 nights ago. During third period, I constantly looked at the empty seat she usually sat in. Sarah was sitting in her usual seat next to it with the biggest grin ever on her face. She was completely hyper over the fact that Britt now knew what we were, although I'd only said I was a vampire. Jennifer sat in the front, as was usual, and instead of her constant flirting, she stared at me with this intense, focused look. It gave me the chills. That look told me she was trying very hard to figure something out. Something about me? Before I'd met Britt, I would have gotten Bob and Sarah and moved to a new location to prevent people from finding out what we were. Now, I wasn't worried about Jennifer figuring out what I was, but what I was to Britt and she to me. No matter how often Britt assured me that she got along all right with Jennifer and that she didn't need help. I knew Jennifer was out to get her, out to get Mate, and I couldn't let that happen. When class finished, I found myself alone with Jennifer. "Hello, Mr. Clitton," she said, her normally sultry voice gone to make place for an all-businesses one. "Hello, Jennifer," I replied, fixing a stern look on my features. "Is there something you wanted to ask? Anything you didn't get during class?" It was hard to sound polite since my voice wanted very badly to snarl, and the monster within me wanted to smack the girl silly for having hurt my mate. She smiled, and suddenly the air around us filled with that pheromone scent that came from her more siren qualities. That had to have been a deliberate act. I was suddenly doubting my assertion that she knew nothing of that heritage. "I want to make you a deal, Mr. Clitton, or can I call you Alexander as well?" she said. "No!" The sound of my name coming from her lips was wrong, especially after I'd told Britt last night how she was the only one who called me that nowadays. "It's Mr. Clitton, Jennifer. I might be young for a teacher, but that doesn't mean you get to call me by my first name." My tone was barely civilized now. She smirked then, and I wondered if that was because of the outright lie I'd just spoken. After all, I was easily 10 times older as the oldest teacher on staff here. "Suit yourself. I know you allow Brittany to call you that, though. Not in public." The words left my throat before I could stop myself, and after I'd said them, I knew there was no backing down. She's exceptionally bright. The assignments she turns in are college level. I've been helping her getting a possible scholarship and giving her extra work that is more challenging. Now, if you'd show the same potential, I might consider doing the same for you, but it seems your talents lay elsewhere. Now, if you'd excuse me." Jennifer folded her arms underneath her chest, pressing her ample bosom up so she nearly popped out of her top. "No, you're not excused, Mr. Clitton." "So," she said the name mockingly. Clearly, she didn't buy my story. I raised an eyebrow at her and upped my own mental abilities. Putting as much power as I dared with a human into the command, I said, "Leave Jennifer. Don't bother me again." Her spine stiffened and her feet were already moving in the direction of the door, but to her credit, she was fighting the command. She didn't think I was very threatening. She thought she was the predator and I was the prey, not the other way around. It gave her the strength she needed to fight it, that plus her own slight resistance to it. I turned on my glare and opened my mouth slightly, letting her see a hint of fang. "You do not want to piss me off, Jennifer. It would not be pleasant for you. I, however, might very much enjoy snapping your neck." She stopped fighting and was nearly out the door before she managed to say with a very strained voice, "I guess that means no deal. Too bad for you. Brittany isn't going to like what will happen." The little wench was out the door before I could stop her, and as I sped after her, I saw she had a whole crowd of groupies waiting for her outside. My throat dry and thirst flaring. I watched her sashay away. I could tell she was scared of me now, but not scared enough to keep her hands off Britt. I had to fight down the urge to contact Britt and tell her and Dennis to get her stuff from home so she could permanently move into my house. Knowing Brittany, she wouldn't take that very well. She'd never leave her brother behind. I understood that. I'd never leave Sarah or Bob if I didn't know they were safe. Sarah? Keep an eye on Jennifer. She's up to something. I send the thought to my sister, but it wasn't half as easy as sending thoughts to Britt was. Even though I'd been doing this for centuries, I vented my anger by setting fire to a stack of papers I was going to throw out. It wasn't very satisfying, but the power inside me rolled when I tapped into it. It felt good, like stretching your muscles after sitting still for a long time. When, at long last, the last students had left and I had no more classes to teach, I all but ran to my car. It felt agonizingly slow to move that way. I wished it was dark already and I could run home instead of drive. It would be nice to move at vampiric speed and stretch my body. Sarah and Bob were both waiting, and they got in without a word, sensing my need for speed. Although Sarah seemed to be in just as much of a hurry as I was, she kept saying how much she had to tell Britt now that she knew. Every time I tried to tell her I hadn't told Britt about her being a vampire too, she'd shush me and launch into another topic. Finally, I gave up. I'm sure Britt had figured it out herself, or else probably Dennis had told her by now. When we reached the house, I could feel Britt's emotions much clearer, and I knew she was in the kitchen talking to Dennis and tasting food. She was completely relaxed and anxious for me to get home. I drew in a relieved breath and followed Sarah inside at a more reasonable pace. Brittany. Sarah chirped happily as she bounded into the kitchen and enveloped my mate into a nearly bone-crushing hug. I'm so glad you know now. I have so much to tell you. The words rushed out of Sarah's mouth at surprising speed, and I wondered if Britt even got half of it. Sarah's enthusiasm made me realize how badly she'd missed a female friend these past centuries. It was obvious now, and I felt sorry that I had not noticed it. If I'd known, I would have chosen locations to live at with more vampires. Despite my distaste for most of the female vampires, I did not appreciate the fact that women always seemed to go after the strongest, most powerful, and commanding men. Sarah was still spewing words at Britt, telling her about how lonely she'd been without someone to share things with and that she hated lying. Brittany was staring with open-mouthed surprise at my sister, and when Sarah noticed, she abruptly shut up. Britt looked at me for a moment and then turned to Sarah. You're a vampire too? Yes. You only told her about yourself, didn't you? Sarah turned to me to glare, and I smiled as I crossed my arms in front of my chest and leaned against the door jamb. I've been trying to tell you that the entire ride home, Derfir Og, I told her with a smirk. Behind Sarah, Britt giggled at my sister's expression, and I opened my arms, signaling that I wanted a hug. My heart literally jumped when she didn't hesitate in hurrying over. Tension I hadn't known was there drained away as soon as I wrapped my arms around her small frame, her delicious scent wrapping itself around my head. Much better. I sent her the thought and sighed when I felt the same emotions reflected inside her. She'd missed me, and she really didn't care about what I was. I have so many questions, Britt said, and she shyly looked up at me, and then at Sarah. Bob's a vampire too, then right? Are you even really siblings? Sarah giggled, her good humor restored as she nodded. Yeah, he is, and yeah, we are. Let's sit down in the living. I made cake to celebrate, proposed Dennis as he picked up a very pretty-looking cake and raised it to show us. Celebrate what? I wondered, and I says, I am no, if people eyes, both the adders o rodish o first in the fupe, the Phoebe into the frenatural community, said Sarah. She'd obviously read his mind, and Dennis beamed at her as she danced over to him, grabbed his hand, and lead him out into the living. I thought it was really sweet that Dennis wanted to welcome me with cake, but it seemed a bit like a waste if he and I would be the only ones to eat it. Alexander unwrapped his arms from around me and tugged me with him into the living. There, he gracefully sat down on one of the couches. Bob was already seated in one of the big chairs, and Dennis and Sarah sat snuggled on the love seat. 2 plates set with cake. I took one and then sat down next to Alexander. He didn't hesitate to wrap his arm around my shoulders and pulled me sideways into him. His breath filtering across the back of my neck, it made goosebumps rise on my arms. To hide my blush, I took a bite of the cake and then nearly moaned at the taste explosion in my mouth. Seriously, Dennis should be chef in his own restaurant or something. It was just that good. Alexander chuckled. She likes it, Dennis. Maybe I should offer you a job. I think Bellavine could use another cook. Dennis laughed. Cool. Now, what questions did you have? A grand motroy? Alexander asked as I put the empty plate on the salon table. He surprised me by pulling my legs across his lap and wrapping his arms around me so tightly that I was practically sitting in it. I missed you, Britt, and in a little while you have to go home, he offered as an explanation. The thought, gentle and filled with a sense of longing that I couldn't entirely place. Was it because he'd missed me and longed for me then, or did he long for something even now? I sorted my mind so I could ask the questions that had been ghosting through my head all day. Talking with Xana's hadn't helped. He'd raised more questions than answered. I understood he really was a witch now, and that his grandmother was apparently called the Crone, which meant she was the oldest and leader of the witches in this community. But about vampires, he hadn't known all that much, and he certainly hadn't been willing to discuss them. He said I should ask Alexander every time I asked something mostly. Yeah? Okay, do you really drink blood, and how often do you have to? I asked. I was a little worried about that. It wouldn't do if my boyfriend was a murderer, although I didn't think they had to kill when they took blood. We really drink blood, Britt. It depends on the vampire how often they need to feed and how well they are able to control themselves, Alexander said with a gentle smile. I go about 2 to 3 weeks in between feeds, said Sarah. But I knew a vamp once who fed only once every 6 months. He was really old though. How often do you feed? I asked Alexander. 2 weeks, but lately a little more often again. By the way, Bob, that was good advice. It does make things more bearable. Made what more bearable? Bob nodded and then spoke, for the first time ever since I met him with full articulation. I knew it would, Alex. Before you ask Brittany, I feed once a week, often even twice. For me, it is much harder to control my fangs when I'm not full. As he said it, I realized I could see his fangs. As he moved his lips, I would catch glimpses of the elongated teeth. They come out whenever I'm around humans, Bob said, flashing me a rather wry smile. I understood why he never talked much now, and why if he did, he always mumbled. It was to hide his fangs. Okay, how about daylight? None of you seem affected? So that's a myth? And garlic and stakes and crosses? They all laughed, including Dennis. None of that works. Depending on the age of a vampire, stakes work sometimes, through the heart or the head. For me, they'd have to remove my brain to actually kill me. For all of us here, I think, Alexander explained. Oh, why the brain and not the heart? That was completely new. I hadn't heard of that before. If you'd take out my heart or at least stake it, it would regenerate eventually. It's only a muscle and we don't actually need it to pump blood through our system. Our brain, it still seats the center of control. Remove that completely and it wouldn't regenerate and thus kill us, Alexander said as he ran his hands over my back, tracing patterns. But a young vampire would die if you staked his heart? I wondered. Yeah. The longer we live, the more our very cells become infused with the immortality. The rate at which this goes is different for everyone, so the older you are, the more physical trauma you can regenerate from. A few decades isn't enough to keep you alive if you fall from the 20th floor or something, or get run over by a truck. A few centuries probably is. Oh, and how do you become a vampire? Do you really exchange blood or something? That would be interesting to know because maybe one day I'd have to become one. I couldn't keep growing older each day and eventually die, while Alexander lived on forever young. You actually do, yes, but it's taxing on the maker, so it doesn't happen very often. It's very dangerous for the maker to make more than one person into a vampire in a short period of time. We don't know why exactly because the blood exchanged isn't enough to even drain you a little. Sarah was the one to tell me this, and for some reason, she looked at Bob as she did. Okay, so vampires don't lightly make that decision? How come you three were all turned then? I asked. It seems strange that 3 siblings would all be made, or did they all have different makers? I was turned first, said Bob, and then I turned Sarah and Alexander myself. I gasped at this new information. Was that why Bob had more trouble with control? Because he'd turned 2 people? Alexander nodded, following my train of thought. We think that has to do with it, yes. It is possible he gave so much of his strength and power to us when he turned us that it left him none for himself. Powers? I had to ask about that later. But we lived in a small village in Ireland, a place that no longer exists. Bob was 18 when he ran away from home, Alexander started. Sarah clapped her hands. Yes, Alex, tell her the whole story. I love it when you tell stories. Alexander nodded and cast Bob a searching look, as if to ask if that was okay. Because it was obvious this was largely Bob's story. I didn't see Bob nod, but something was communicated between the 2 males. We come from a large family, such as almost all families were during that time. Our mother bore 13 children, of which 4 died before their 10th birthday. Sarah was the youngest and Bob nearly the oldest, 1 sister and brother born before him. Both already married and living in their own houses, a beautiful woman had appeared in town. She was what many women called a temptress. Succubus, a woman that would lure innocent men and eat them. They weren't completely wrong. The woman was a vampire, but although she ate them, she didn't kill her victims. Deidre. Her name was Deidre. It means tears, Bob said. Emotion reflected in his voice that I couldn't quite place. It was clear this woman had meant a lot to him, though. Alexander nodded, and as he continued, his voice sounded more Irish with every word he spoke. Bob was drawn to Deidre, and one day he declared to our parents that he wished to marry her. Father refused and said she was evil, wrong. Bob ran away, and we didn't see him again for 10 years. Wow, Bob was seriously a lot older than Alexander? I was 15 when he disappeared and 25 when I saw him again. That was the night he turned me. The entire village had been struck by disease, and after that famine. The disease killed many people during the first wave, among them a lot of our siblings and father. Alexander hesitated a short moment then before saying, I was married and had my own house, next to the smithy where I'd been apprenticed for a very long time before taking over. The smith had no sons left alive. The second wave of disease killed both my children, one of them barely more, then an infant. It drove my wife mad with grief and she killed herself while I was out to visit Sarah, my only sibling left alive in town. I felt shocked. Alexander had been married and had 2 children, and he'd lost it all to a stupid disease? A disease that nearly killed his entire family? I was weak and sick from hunger. Everyone was like that, but some were sicker than others. I wasn't so sick that I would have died, but Sarah was. The very day my wife died would have been the last for her too if Bob hadn't showed up. I was mad at him at first, but mostly I was shocked. He hadn't aged a single day since last I'd seen him. Bob looked grief-stricken as he told me he'd only just heard the news about all the deaths in town. He said he'd come as fast as possible. Then he offered us the miracle cure for Sarah, the thing that had kept him young. There. Alexander stopped and looked at Bob again. Alexander didn't trust me. He couldn't believe I had something to offer that would save Sarah. I looked like a vagabond and couldn't blame him, my clothes torn and dirty, blood caked on the sleeves and around the neckline of my shirt. He wanted me to cure him first so that he knew it worked. I told him it would kill him, but that he'd wake up again all better. I was desperate though. I needed him to agree and let me save Sarah. I couldn't allow my entire family to die. So I attacked him and nearly drained him before he could say any more, then fed him my blood. While Alexander was out and undergoing the change, I did the same to Sarah. I knew she didn't have much time left. Not enough to wait for Alexander to gain consciousness again. The second time was much harder, and it left me so weak that for a while I thought I would be the one to die. Alexander picked up the story again. When I woke up, my senses were much better and I was filled with a thirst I couldn't understand. I found a pale and unconscious Bob on the floor next to Sarah, but Sarah looked so much better than before. The vampirism had already healed the sores, and she no longer looked emaciated, and she looked beautiful again. Like I remembered her, she was pale though, and she felt cold. For a moment, I thought she was dead because she wasn't breathing, but then she opened her eyes. Sarah interrupted. We don't have to breath, just like we don't have a heartbeat. But we go through the motion of breathing, so not to scare you humans. Alexander nodded. After that, Bob explained what we were, and ever since we've been roaming around in the world. Living in places for a few years at a time and returning to some places we like every other generation. We were all quiet for a moment while I absorbed all this information. Then suddenly Dennis said, I'm glad you saved her, Bob, thank you. Only then did I realize that this was new for him too and that he'd been just as enraptured as I had been. Alexander shifted his legs and then tightened his arms around me. It is time for you to go home à Gramochois. I will drive you. I groaned before I could stop myself. I didn't want to go home at all, although for Andy's sake I knew I would anyway. It would just be very hard to be without Alexander yet again. It felt like I'd barely been with him all day. Maybe it's better if I drive? Can't take the risk of Jennifer seeing you, Alex, Sarah said, and I knew she was right, and so did Alexander. But we both groaned and shook our head at the same time.